You've now had to follow Bill Gates and Steve Ballmer, two legendary figures.
Their clear message was, don't try to be like us.
Did Steve say, if you do this well, we'll be happy?
Look, if you do a good job, maybe you will have another job. If not, you won't.
The result of having empathy made you a better CEO.
My pursuit is there a growing sense of empathy for people around me?
You get a standing ovation for what you've done?
No, I get a lot of people asking me, hey, look, go come home and fix my computer.
Would you fix your tie, please?
Well, people wouldn't recognize me if my tie was fixed, but okay. Just leave it this way. All right. I don't consider myself a journalist, and nobody else would consider myself a journalist. I began to take on the life of being an interviewer, even though I have a day job running a private equity firm. How do you define leadership? What is it that makes somebody tick? You've now had to follow Bill Gates and Steve Ballmer, two legendary figures. Did you feel at that time that you were really ready for the job following those legends, or were you saying, hey, I can do a better job than they did?
The best advice I got from both Bill and Steve, I think helped me a lot, because their clear message was, don't try to be like us. Don't even bother to sort of say, oh, I'm succeeding these people. Just be your own. In fact, I remember very distinctly, even during the interview process, this is for the board was conducting, they asked me, hey, do you want to be the CEO? And I said, only if you want me to be the CEO. And the feedback I got was, well, but people who want to be CEOs are like, I want to be CEO. I said, look, that's not me. And I remember going and talking to Steve, and he says, yeah, just be yourself. It's too late to change.
Since you've been the CEO, 3.5 years, the stock is up about, I guess it's about 120%. When you go to your annual shareholder meetings, do you get a standing ovation for what you've done?
No, I get a lot of people asking me, hey, look, go come home and fix my computer.
Okay. You are a native of India. What part of India?
I was born in Hyderabad, which is in the central part of India.
And so growing up, your parents doted on you, I assume?
Yeah, they did.
And they told you were going to be Prime Minister or something important in the country. What did they want you to be?
They just wanted me to stop playing cricket and take my studies a little more seriously.
Now, you were an avid cricket player. Is that right?
Yes, that is correct. I was in love with it, yeah.
And when did you realize you weren't going to be a professional cricket player?
Pretty soon. Quickly, I realized that at best, I would play, what is considered perhaps first-class cricket in India, but I was not going to go much further than that. But then that's when my dad, in fact, I remember one of the big decisions that changed my life was, my entire outlook was so provincial when I look back at it, which is, hey, I want to stay in Hyderabad, maybe study economics and political science and work for a bank. That was about the extent of my ambition. And he looks at me and he says, what are you doing? You got to get out of this place. And so he pushed me out to get to an engineering school, and that pretty much, of course, defined the trajectory afterwards.
Your father was a member of the senior civil service, which is an important position, I guess, in India. Is that right?
Yeah, my dad was a very different guy than me in terms of, let me say, his academic prowess. So it is always humorous, which you look at my report cards and he says, oh, I don't understand how anybody can have these kind of marks. But the nice thing about it was he would say it in such endearing ways that it never made me feel bad.
You mean the marks weren't high enough or weren't?
Not high enough.
They weren't high enough.
Because, yeah, the guy had never met an exam he didn't ace, as he would say.
Okay.
And so he was like, it was astounding to me that he would have a son who couldn't ace an exam.
Now, your father's still alive.
Yes.
And he must be very proud of what you've achieved.
Not enough.
So you went to college in India, and then you decided to get graduate school in the United States. So
Yeah.
where did you go?
I went to University of Wisconsin in Milwaukee for my computer. That's when I switched from electrical engineering to computer science.
But when you're in India, University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee can't be that well known in India. So how did you happen to wind up there?
I'd never been to west of Bombay, quite frankly, and then I showed up in Milwaukee.
Did you have a winter coat, or what?
That was my first very valued possession in life, a winter coat, which is very important. Unfortunately, I'd picked up this bad habit of smoking in India in college. And the one nice thing about going to school in Milwaukee is if you're a smoker, you had to go out in the winter and smoke. And that one winter in Milwaukee cured me of my smoking habit.
Wow, good. So you got a job after you graduated at Sun Microsystems. And what was your job there?
I was a software developer.
Okay. And then you got recruited to go to another company called Microsoft. And that was in 1992?
That's right.
So, but you also had applied to go to the University of Chicago School of Business. So how did you decide to do one or the other?
You know, quite frankly, David, I was very committed to saying, oh, I want to go to the business school. Maybe, who knows, maybe even go to Wall Street. That was sort of my...
The highest calling of mankind, right?
Says David Rubenstein.
Right.
And I thought, wow, maybe that's what I should do. And then somewhere along the lines, I started talking to people and I said, hey, why would you do that? You're in tech. And you should really come back. It's an amazing time because Windows NT, which eventually became our server business and what have you, was just starting out. And I subsequently went and did some combination of part-time and other courses and actually finished my MBA, which I find stunning. And
So you were commuting, in other words. You were working, and then on weekends you're commuting to University of Chicago, and that must have taken a lot of energy to do both, right?
Oh, it was crazy.
So you're beginning your ascent up, but you're dealing with some personal issues. Your first child was born with cerebral palsy. He is now 21 years old. So how did you realize that was going to change your life, and how have you dealt with that issue?
Yeah, even I was 29 years old when Zane, our son, was born, and if you had even asked me maybe even an hour before he was born what was going through my head, it was all about, oh, is the nursery going to be ready? What's going to happen to our weekends now we have a son? And when will Anu, my wife, get back to a job and so on? But obviously everything changed that night. He was born because of an undetected in utero distress, asphyxiation, with severe brain damage, and that led to cerebral palsy, and he's quadriplegic now. The first, I would say, David, maybe even 2 years or more even, I was more about like, why did this happen to me? What happened to us? And all of these plans that I had are now all been thrown up in the air and changed. Whereas Anu, my wife, what came naturally to her as a mother was she said, okay, I'm not going back to my job. I'm going to really care for my son, drive him around for therapy after therapy. And I watched that. Without schooling me, I got schooled that nothing happened to me. What happened was to my son, and that it was time for me to understand that, realize that, see life through his eyes, and then do my duty as a father. That, to me, perhaps, it didn't come in one moment. It's something that I think took time. But as I figured it out, it changed me, both as obviously a parent, but also who I am today and how I approach everything.
Now, your wife was trained as an architect.
That's right.
And she's given up doing that for a while.
That's right.
Now, you have two daughters. One of your daughters has severe learning disabilities as well. And how did that affect you and your wife?
In fact, one of the things that happened because of our son was we built up a tremendous community of people, whether this was the therapists or other parents with, of children with disabilities. And so we were involved in that community. By the time our youngest daughter came into our lives, I must say we had the richness of this community to support us. And it turned, when we recognized very early on, and Anu and I, and Anu in particular, was very quick to realize that she will need additional help. And so we found this school actually in Vancouver, BC, which was all around neuroplasticity. The idea was you can train your brain to learn, so instead of compensating. And so we decided that, we're going to move the family to Vancouver. Zane was going to stay with me in Seattle. My daughters and my wife were going to live in Vancouver. We were going to commute again over the weekends. But the thing that that all, quite honestly, that is where it came all naturally to us, because in some sense, Zane had taught us what it takes to give people with disabilities the best shot, and so it's something that we took on.
And your son lives with you now.
Yes.
And one of the qualities that you say you got from all this was empathy, and that the result of having empathy made you a better CEO and a better person. Is that fair?
Yeah, in fact, when I look at empathy, and most people think empathy is just something that you reserve, for your life and your family and your friends or what have you. But the reality is, I think it's an existential priority for a business. Because if you look at it, like, what is our business? Our business is to meet unmet, unarticulated needs of customers. There is no way our innovation to meet unmet, unarticulated needs is going to come about if we don't listen. Not just listen to the words, but don't go deep to understand what the needs are behind it. So I think empathy is core to innovation. And life's experience, if you listen and you learn from, teaches you. I wouldn't claim, as I've sort of even talked about it, with any innate capability of empathy that I was born with. If anything, it's life that has taught me. And if anything, my pursuit is every year, is there growing sense of empathy for people around me.
Steve say, if you do this well, we'll be happy. If you don't do it well, you might not get another job.
One of the things that is amazing of both Bill and Steve is their candor. It's not like they sugarcoat anything. They're very, very honest about most things in life, or everything in life. And they were sort of very clear. Look, if you do a good job, maybe you will have another job. If not, you won't.
You're rising up in Microsoft. You're running the business solutions division at one point, but then they say to you, we'd like you to run the search business called Bing. And did you say, you can't compete against Google, I don't want to do that? Or did you say, no, I'm happy to do that?
It is, I had just been promoted to lead our business solutions team. And I was loving that job. It's something that I'd aspired to do. And Steve comes around and he says, hey, you know what? I have an idea for you. I think you should go run this group that's got high attrition, and we have a very tough task ahead. And I don't know whether it's a good career move, but I need help, and think wisely and choose. And I was like, wow, this is an interesting choice in front of me. And I remember very distinctly, going that night to the building in which the Bing team and our search team was housed. And it was, maybe 9 o'clock or so, and the parking lot was full, people were in. And I said, wow, what's the deal here? I mean, these people are like working and inspired, and so I said, well, I got to join this team. I got to, like, the fight that they showed caused me to not take the easy path and get in.
Okay. Well, Steve say, if you do this well, we'll be happy. If you don't do it well, you might not get another job.
That's correct. And that was, Steve was, one of the things that is amazing of both Bill and Steve is their candor. It's not like they sugarcoat anything. They're very, very honest about most things in life, or everything in life. And they were sort of very clear. Look, if you do a good job, maybe you will have another job. If not, you won't.
So you did a pretty good job, and then they came along and asked you to run another business which was not that competitive at the time, and that was your cloud computing business. How did it happen that Amazon, which was not a computer company more or less, became a giant in cloud, and Microsoft right nearby wasn't a giant there?
The interesting thing is, what happens when a company becomes successful is this beautiful virtuous cycle that gets created between your concept or product, your capability, and your culture. Right, you really have all these three things fall into gear, and they're working super well. But then what happens is the concept that made you successful runs out of gas. It's not growing anymore. You now need new capability, And in order to have that new capability, you need a culture that allows you to grow that new capability, right? Our server business was growing strong double digits. It was a high margin business. And you look around, on the other side of the lake, here is a very low margin business called the cloud. And people will look at that and say, why would we do that? When we have such an amazing, fast-growing, high-margin business. And that, I think, is the challenge. And so to be able to see these secular trends long before they become conventional wisdom, change your business model, change your technology, and change the product is the challenge of business. In tech, it's unforgiving. But quite frankly, now that tech is part of every business, I think all of us have to deal with it.
So you get to be the CEO of this company. You're following two legendary figures. How do you go to them and say, by the way, a lot of things you did, I don't want to do anymore. I'm going to change things.
I was a consummate insider, right? I spent 22 years or so when I became CEO. Growing up in the company that Bill and Steve built, I understood like the back of my palm all the things we got right and all the things we got wrong. And I had a point of view on what I wanted to do if I was going to become CEO.
We now need to make Microsoft thrive in a mobile-first and a cloud-first world.
It was not about trying to criticize our past or praise the past. It was about what do we do in the future.
One of the things you tried to do and change the culture was to change what was known as a very proprietary culture at Microsoft. Microsoft said, this is the way we do things. We don't want to cooperate with other firms necessarily, competitors or other kinds of firms. How did you change that culture?
I said, look, let me not view things as zero-sum. If anything, let me approach even who are our traditional competitors and say, well, customers are heterogeneous. They use some of what we do and some of what you do. Let's figure out a way to combine forces where it's market expansive and it satisfies customers. So at least that's how I've approached it. And it's a lesson I learned in my early days of Microsoft.
Historically, Windows and Office were your two cash cows. They are still the biggest source of profit?
Absolutely.
So after those two, and you suspect they'll be major source of profit for a long time.
Absolutely.
But after that, you have other things. You spent $26 billion, the biggest acquisition ever for Microsoft, to buy LinkedIn. What does LinkedIn have to do with Microsoft?
If you look at it, we have 1 billion users of Windows and Office or Microsoft 365. And what is the common thread there? They're all professionals. They're all people who are trying to get things done. So we have the professional cloud and the professional devices in the world. And the vision was to combine that with the professional network of LinkedIn. In fact, if you look at some of the integrations that we have since launched, you can be in Outlook. You can get an email. I can get an email from David Rubenstein. I can go look up your LinkedIn profile, which I hope you have.
I'll get one today, but yes.
And then sort of look up all of the mutual connections we may have. So the idea that the professional network and the professional content can be brought together, I think ultimately can be a big driver of productivity. So that is one. But one of the other pieces, which has been a real game changer for us, is LinkedIn is the way people do business-to-business sales. And if you want to be able to reach customers and sell, this integration is going to be game changer.
Okay.
Same thing with talent management. So I think we have lots of synergies between the products that are now coming true.
You gave a statement about women's pay.
I just gave such an absolute nonsensical answer. When I talk to women who are very close to me, very senior, very successful women that are key to Microsoft, and heard even their own personal experiences, that's when it struck me.
Did you hear from your wife about that? Or?
Absolutely. My mom and my wife.
Almost everything you've done since you've been CEO, the last 3.5 years, has worked perfectly. The stock is up, the market value is up, everybody likes you. The only thing that I could find that anybody criticized you for was you gave a statement about women's pay at one point, and you correctly, I think, changed your position the next day. But can you explain what happened?
Absolutely. I was asked about, pay equity. In fact, I just gave such an absolute nonsensical answer, which Maria Clave, who was interviewing me, was kind enough to correct me while I was on stage itself. Because I was answering a question literally using some past, my own personal experience without understanding the broader context, the depth of that question, which is, what is a person like me, who is a CEO of a company, doing to make sure that, one, women can fully participate in our companies and in our economies. There is equal pay for equal work, and more importantly, there is equal opportunity for equal work. That was the real question. It was not about like, okay, what worked for you and what career advice do you have for me? It was a great learning moment for me. It's something that I've obviously taken back. In fact, when I talk to women who are very close to me, very senior, very successful women that are key to Microsoft, and heard even their own personal experiences, that's when it struck me how, the job of a CEO in particular is to make sure that everyone, whether it's gender diversity or ethnic diversity, can first come into the company, do their best work so that we can then serve our customers. So that's a realization, which I thought I had, quite frankly. But I'm glad I messed up so publicly, because I think I internalized the lessons from it.
Did you hear from your wife about that? Or?
Absolutely. At that time, my mom was alive. For my mom and my wife had to give up her career because of our son. But even in my mom's case, she struggled. She, in fact, now I realize it a lot more than I even did, obviously growing up, was the trade-off she had to make, where the system that she was working in did not support her re-entry into the workforce after she had both myself and my sister.
So you have about 125,000 employees, something like that. So what percentage are male, what percentage are female, and how many senior women do you have? Technology is not a place where a lot of women have risen to the top yet, relatively speaking.
In fact, one of the things that we have made some good progress on is on the women's representation, which we have a long way to go. I mean, you got to remember that in tech, we have a particularly tougher issue because of our technology disparity in terms of gender diversity. But let's start with the progress, which is, in the last year, we've gone from around, we improved to 27.7% of women coming into the organization, which is around 2 points more than historical. Right. And in the technology side, where we've improved by 4 points. So that's, I would say, movement in the right direction, but not enough, obviously. One of the other things our board also did was to change the compensation system for me as well as my direct reports, to say, look, numeric progress, besides all the work that we may do, programs we may have, and the talk, let's even tie compensation of the senior-most people, including the CEO, to real numerical progress. And so we're doing everything, but quite frankly, it's going to take continuous vigilance, continuous push, and it's a top-of-mind issue for all of us.
You've only been doing this 3.5 years, which is relatively short tenure for Microsoft CEOs. How many more years would you like to do this?
I have been at Microsoft now for 25 years, and I think the thing that I feel that gives me that source of energy is really that sense of purpose of the company. Because quite honestly, it's not, I don't know how I'll market. It's probably not even up to me as to how many years I will be there. And I think it's going to be fun for me to do it each day, and it's a real privilege to do it each day.